Bum, ba-da-dum, bum. Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1847. Double and triple check your sources. So I've been working on my genealogy again today. I'm kind of allowing myself an hour every day to go in and check my genealogy, working on some of these DNA matches, because we know that we're related. We just don't know how. So the DNA test shows we're related. The genealogy side of it shows us how we are related. So we're working through that. And I came across some interesting stuff today, and I was like, what are these people thinking? So some of the stuff I came across, now, there are certain things that when I'm working with inside Ancestry that I do not do unless I am like super, super confident in that particular person's tree. And that is to accept, because when you go into Ancestry, they have these hints that come up, the little green leaf that comes up that shows you have some hints. Some of the hints are other people's trees. And so I've come across some of those, and I always go on and have a look because they may have information that I am missing. And I might be able to use that as, or let me verify that to see if that is a correct information. Like it could be a birth date, a death date, a marriage date. Because there are some where I'm having problems finding their marriage records or their death records. And so I'm looking at other people's trees to see what they've got. And then I'm like, oh, how did they get this? So I can then go into their tree and have a look and look at what sources that they're using for that information. Like it'll go down and each entry on the tree will show you that if there's any sources associated with it, you can click on the entry and it will put little lines up to, there's a source column in the middle on the ancestry of that particular person, and it will highlight which ones are the sources. And so I'll go into those and have a look and go, yeah, that could be the right person, but I'm not sort of like, yep, that's it. Been looking for that record for age. Nope. We go in with, we need several sources to verify that information to say, yes, we have it. Not just one. Death certificate, pretty good. Obituary to back it up, pretty good. So, you can build on things. And one of the things that we use as our guidelines is the genealogy standards. This is the 2nd edition revised, which most professional genealogists go by. Chapter 1, right here, it says genealogical proof standard. This tells you that when you are researching exactly what you need to be looking for when you're looking for things. There are 5. It says here, a genealogical conclusion is proved when it meets all 5. So there's 5 GPS components, which is the GPS components are the genealogical proof standard, GPS. Each part contributes to a proved conclusion creditably. Yeah, I got that one right. So number 1, reasonable, exhaustive research ensures examination of all potential relevant sources. It minimizes the risk that undiscovered evidence will overturn a too hasty conclusion. Did you guys see that little light that went across? I have no idea what that was. Something just flew across in front of me. Number 2, complete and accurate source citations demonstrating the research extent and the source's quality. They enable others to replicate the steps taken to reach a conclusion. Inability to replicate research casts doubts on its conclusions. So this means that if you are using a source, then you need to cite that source. Yes, I know citing sources are a pain in the butt, but they have to be done. I hate doing cites, but then I used to love making catalog cards for the library. And this is going to take me back. Some of you are going to go, catalog cards in a library? What the hell is she talking about? So we had these little index cards. It were 3x5 index cards, and each book had to have a certain number of cards made. One of them was the Dewey Decimal System, which is the numbering system that they used to use to categorize books and put them into places in the library. And there was a certain format that you had to use. On one of those cards, and we had 5 different cards we had to use for a nonfiction book. There was 5 different setups that we had to do. One of those setups is exactly the same as how we source citations. So it made it a little bit easier because I love making the catalog cards and figuring it out. And I'm like, oh, this is the same. And when I actually did a course, one of my weeks was spent doing citation. I spent a week doing a class on citations. Yes. And then it suddenly dawned on me that oh, I've seen this before. And I'm like going through, I've seen this before. Why have I seen this before? Why does this look so familiar? Then I suddenly realized that it's exactly the same as one of the ways that we used to create catalog cards. And I was like, oh, I used to like doing that. So citations aren't so bad anymore. Plus, I have a really cool book, Evidence Explained. It is a thick textbook. It has every possible thing in there that you can cite on, everything from a website to an online article to an offline article to books to magazines to journals, people's journals, to all sorts of things. Anything that you can do to help somebody find that source is a step in the right direction, because you need to make sure that's credible. They've got to be able to find it, basically. Critical tests of relevant evidence, and that's number 2. Number 3, critical tests of relevant evidence through process of analysis and correlation facilitate sound interpretation of the information and evidence. They also ensure that the conclusion reflects all of the evidence, including the best existing evidence. So sometimes you can't find an actual certificate and you have exhausted all probability. Now, it could be the certificate no longer exists because there was a fire or a flood or something that came through that destroyed some records. And so a birth certificate may no longer be available for searching. So what other sources can you use to validate a person's birth date? So there's, what can you use? Resolution of conflicting evidence substantiates that conclusions' credibility. If conflicting evidence is not resolved, a credible conclusion is not possible. So you got to make sure that if you have conflicting information, and we're going to talk about that one in a minute, because I've come across a lot of conflicting information in the last couple of days, and some of it is sort of like, why? When it is completely obvious. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion eliminates the possibility that the conclusion is based on bias, preconception, or inadequate appreciation of the evidence. It also shows or explains how the evidence leads to the conclusion. Now, you will see these all the time. I do have one. Hang on. I've actually got a couple of them down here. No, I've got 3 of them down here. So these are 3. Hang on. That's a travel magazine. We don't need that one. So these are 3 different magazines from different genealogy associations. Now, if you go into these magazines, they all have articles written in them. Hang on. Oh, yes, I've got to get that book. There's a book in here I need to get. That's why I've got that thing. And a lot of them will have in there an article about a particular person and how they found out, how they tracked the information. Now I'm just going through. This one is not, I should have done this beforehand. It just suddenly occurred to me while we were talking about this. Let's see. No, this one doesn't have, hang on. I'm just going to go straight to the National Geological, because see this person on the front? There'll actually be an article in here about this person. So this one has a lot more of them in there. This is Eleanor. Oh, this one actually talks about DNA. Cool. Now, some of you may look at this and go, oh my gosh, there's just so much information in there. Yeah, it's cool. So this here is the article is called Mitochondrial DNA and an Inferred Conclusion, Revisiting Eleanor, Turman, Crow, Overton, and Culpeper in Madison counties, Virginia. There's the article. Now, if you look here, there's a little bit that's written, and then there's the footnotes. This is all of their sources and citations for this particular starting of this thing. Then you go to the next page. You've got a little more article, then citations, article, citations. They go through this. This is how we write articles, and we can see all of the resources that they have used to come to the conclusion that they have in this article. This article is written all about how they got to that conclusion. They start off with a question. We always start with a question. This is, a lot of researchers will know this. You start with your hypothesis. You get your hypothesis, which is your question, and now you have to prove or disprove that question. Is it true? Is it not true? And this is how you do it. And so these are all the resources that they've gone through. They're written down the bottom here. So you've just got these little bits of article across the top, which makes it very quick reading. But then if you want more information, you're like, oh, that sounds really, where did they get that information from? You can come down here and you can see where the source is. It's all written out here in citations. Again, article, citations, and this is as it goes through the article. Rather than having a huge I mean, they've got for this article here, this goes on for a few pages. They have 127 citations in here. This has been a very well-researched article, 127 citations. Now, can you imagine putting all of them at the end of the article? And then you're going, oh, this is number 6. Now I've got to go to the end of the article. No, you just go down the bottom and there's number 6. It's right there. It's handy. And some people are sort of like, oh, why do they do that? That's just so annoying. I just want to read the article. So just read the little bits at the top and go through. And if you want to look, you just go down the bottom and there it's right there. You don't have to go flipping to the back of the article to find the citations. It's right there at the bottom on the page that it appears. Yes, so citations, very, very important. So this was a several-page document. And when you actually read the article, it is not that long. There is way more citations in here than there is words in the article. I know, crazy, huh? And and now the National Genealogical Society, quarterly magazine comes out. They usually have a couple of these types of stories in there, and they're fascinating. And the cool part is that you can go in there and read them, and you get an idea about how articles are written. So that if you're doing any certifications and everything else, you get an idea. And when you've got to write a paper, you get an idea on how they are written, so that it gives you can go through several of them to get an idea on how they write these articles and things. Plus, they also have courses in how to write these articles, which is really cool. So that is how you say that's an article. Now, going back to when you're studying research, make a plan. Here is your question. Like, my question is, this person is related to me by DNA. How are they related? How are they related to me? Yes, ancestry might say your 5th to 8th cousin. I actually found they said 5th to 8th cousin. It was actually a 4th cousin by the time we proved the genealogy. So they're making a guess based on the centimorgans, which are very important little things. And if you want to know more about those, just go research centimorgans. So using more than one source. When you are going through somebody's DNA and the trees come up in those hints, look at their sources. And this is one thing I've been having a lot of fun with lately. And I went into one particular tree and they said that this person died on a particular date. It's written in their tree that they died on this date. I'm like, oh, that's not the date that I have, because I actually found a copy online of this person's death certificate. So I was sort of like, they had the death certificate. It was all written out, had all the information on it. And now the information on death certificate is only as good as the person who's providing the information. But this person had a completely, and it wasn't off by a day. It was off by a lot. It was a different day, a different month, a different year. It was not just off by a couple of days. Couple of days I could deal with. But this was off by days, month, year. It was a completely different date. And I'm like, okay, but they have the correct children listed from what I have found during research. And because I've spent a lot of time researching on my tree. I know that there are mistakes in there from my earlier days. But as I've gotten more and more experience with researching and everything else, I have been, the more recent stuff is very well documented and everything else. It's not just click, 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 like some people have done in the past, me included. But now I've learned a lot of how researching skills that I have learned over the years have come into play. And so I'm very picky about information I put in my tree. And I will put information in my tree and I can put notes in there to say, hey, I need to go back and check this. I need another resource. I need another source for this information. Still not quite sure if this is the right person. I've got their death certificates. I've got an obituary that backs it up. But it is a very common name. So is it actually the right person? So like, And I've got the obituary, which has all their kids listed. I'm like, okay, we've probably got the right person here. Notice I said probably because I'm still a little skeptical. So I went into this person's tree because I thought, oh, wonder if they have the marriage date for this couple, because I couldn't find the marriage date anywhere. And I was searching Ireland and England and New Zealand and even Australia, because sometimes the families, as they're migrating from England and Scotland and Ireland and Cornwall, went through Australia first. They may have stayed there for a year or two, or they may have just been there for a couple of months and then they hopped on the ship and went over to New Zealand. Or they could have been there for a few years before they ended up in New Zealand. So knowing the immigration patterns as well also tells you where you can go and look. This is why making a plan is important, because it lessens the chance that you miss something. So you make your plan, you figure out what sources are you going to have a look at. What is already in your tree that could correspond with what, on how this person is related. Now, I have a lot of stuff in my tree, a lot. And like I've already verified 3 DNA matches in the last week. And some people go, oh, that's not very many. And yeah, that is a lot, because there's been a lot of research that has gone into some of those, because some of them I had my tree to a certain point, their tree to a certain point, and I had to fill in the gap. There was a gap in the middle. We kind of knew where we were connected, but it was how are we connected through this area, this gray area here, where there is nothing in my tree and nothing on their tree. And so then having to go through and research, also verifying the information that they already have in their tree. So that's my first step, is verifying their information, seeing if I have those names in my tree anywhere already. And if I do, is it the same thing? So I was in this one tree and I was having a look at, it came up as a hint. So I thought, well, let me go in and have a look. I knew I wouldn't be accepting the information unless I was like dead certain that this was the same information. I got into way too much trouble years ago when I used to do that. I haven't done that for years. It's got to be spot on information. And so I went into this person's tree and I go, oh, they have a different death date than what I do. Why do they have a different death date? What sources do they have? So I pulled up the person's, because they give you the thing. And so I clicked on the tree thing, went to this person's profile that's on Ancestry there. And I went down to where the death date was, and it said it had a couple of sources. So I clicked on it. What was interesting is one of the sources that they had was one of the same sources I had, which is a copy of the death certificate, which has a different date to what they have in their tree. So either they saw, oh, here's the death certificate, and didn't update their information to be the same as what's in the death certificate. They also had another couple of resources there that backed up the death date on the death certificate, but their tree showed something different. And I'm sort of like, yeah, they're not paying attention to details. They're either just clicking, or they're going, oh, yep, we've got that in there. Whenever you go and you're doing any research and you come across a certificate, always make sure, do I already have that information in my tree? If this is the person you're looking for, do I already have that information in my tree? Is it the same as what's on the marriage certificate, the death certificate, the birth certificate? Maybe it's some other sort of certificate that you've got. That could be a divorce decree. Yes, there's some of those out there too. Interesting thing on divorces. So back in the earlier days with census reports, a lot of times there are women who were divorced that would actually put down on the census that they were a widow, and they would move to a new town and start things afresh because they've just divorced their husband. They've left him wherever he was. They've moved to a new town for a fresh start. They tell everybody that they are a widow because of the connotations that went with it. If you were divorced and you just moved into town, the woman got a rougher time of it than the men did. So the women were actually scorned if they were divorced. There's a lot of different stories out there about how divorced women were treated. But if they turned around and said they were a widow, the new community they were in were a lot more accepting of them rather than if they were divorced. Yes, so just as an FYI. If you see widow on a census, it could mean that so then you've got to go and find out if the husband is actually dead, or was he still alive and they actually got divorced, but they said that they were widowed, just to save face. Keep that one in mind. So anyway, so we're finding these different certificates and things that are on people's profiles that give you different information than what's in their tree. Found another one that had a birth certificate in there. It had the right first, middle, and last name, but the parents on the birth certificate were different to the parents that were listed on this person's profile. Now, it could be that the certificate might have actually been adopted parents or birth parents. That has been known to happen. And the people listed on the family tree are either the adopted parents or the birth parents. Now, with my great grandmother, she was adopted when she was 11 years old. So I have her. She's got 2 parents listed in her profile. One is her adoptive family, and the other is her birth family. And she was 11 years old when she was adopted, so she could already tell us who her sisters were. They got adopted by the same family and everything else. And a lot of people go, oh, I see that you're part of the Williams family. No, actually, we're not. Yeah, because they say, oh, are we related? And they'll, people will send me messages about my great grandmother or her family and say, oh, I see we're related. You've got this person, and well, this is my da 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 da, and they'll go on about how the connection is. And I go, okay, actually, My great-grandmother was adopted into that family, so we have no blood relation with that family. Oh, but you've got all these people. Yeah, because I had built the tree and then discovered my great-grandmother was adopted. So we also knew who her birth family was. So we've created both trees for her side of the family. So if people come in from the Williams side of the family, which is the adoptive family, then I can give them information on their family, because somebody also along the way, there is a rumor that it was an in-family adoption. I have not found a connection yet to support that claim. So I do actually have a research question out there if my great-grandmother was actually adopted by a member of the family. And if they were adopted by the member of the family, how close was that relationship, or was it a distant cousin? So far, I have found zero connection between the two families except for this adoption. So that is one open-ended question that I do have. So there is that rumor out there, trying to prove it, disprove it. So far, it's proving to be false, but I haven't exhausted all. I haven't completed all 5 steps that are listed in here in this book to prove or disprove it. So I've got to keep going until I can fill out those 5 steps. Once I've completed those 5 steps in there, then I can write it up and say whether or not it's true or false. So watch other people's trees. Be very careful when you go and accept other people's trees, because you might have the mother father listed. Then, this might be the person A, and then you've got their mother and father are listed, and then their spouse is listed, and maybe their children. What you don't see in that little view that it gives you is that there could be siblings that are also listed. And when you go to accept the tree, all those siblings get put into your tree. I made this mistake years ago, and this is one of the part of the trees I have to go clean up. But I made that mistake years ago of accepting a thing based on the face value and not going in and checking their sources. This is how I learned. Trust me, I've made probably just about every mistake a genealogist, anybody researching genealogy can make. And so and all of a sudden this person had 15 siblings. I knew for a fact, simply because I knew the family personally, that there was no way there were 15 children in that family. There was 5, but somebody had gone and gotten very ambitious because they found a first name they found the first name of the mother and the first name of the father, and the last name all corresponded with this family, but they didn't realize that there were actually 2 separate families that had the same, where the mother and the father had the same first names as the family that I knew personally, that only had 5 siblings, and the family that had 10 siblings. And they had combined them into one family. And there were actually 2 separate families that were no relation whatsoever. So I made that mistake of accepting that one because I didn't know the siblings were there. So you've got to go into the tree, click on it. Are there any siblings listed? Because they're going to get put into your tree as well. So yeah, be very careful when accepting other information like that. The other thing that you can do too is create a timeline. Now, there is a really cool app that's called Goldie May. Goldie May is a phenomenal research tool. And I'm actually going to see if I can get Richard to come. Richard's the creator of Goldie May. And I actually sat down with him and I said, look, I had been on one of the genealogy courses I had been on one time. He comes in, he introduces Goldie May, and I'm just like, this is it's a fantastic tool. And it keeps track of everything for you. You can turn it on, and it's an extension that goes on as a Chrome extension, and you have a panel that comes up on the side, and every time you click and go to a different site, it puts the website up there. It tracks it for you. Plus, I found a whole bunch of other non-genealogy things that I can actually use Goldie May for. Like if I've got like 10 or 12 tabs open, and I'm sort of like, oh, I need to remember what those tabs are. I can go and get it to group those tabs in one area. And then later on, I can go back into Goldie May and go, right, I need to go back to that. And these are all the tabs that were related to that one thing when I was doing research. So it makes it very easy for that, whether I'm researching for genealogy or for something else. But this Goldie May will track everything for you, and you can open it up by project. You open the project, you put in there your question. Here is my plan, and it will help you keep track of your plan. Plus, it also has what we call the subway map. And the subway map is where it will take however many people that you're going to compare their timelines too. Like you can say, all right, I want to compare this tree, and this tree with my tree. And then what it does is that it takes each of these components and puts it down the side there, and they each have their little, each one's a different color and has its, frozen for some reason. Sorry. Hopefully the voice is still recording. And then what it does is it tracks the different subways. And this way you can see if there's any major differences between the different trees. In my mother-in-law's line of family line, all the way back to Richard Warren, who was on the Mayflower. And there is one name in there where I have come across them on several different trees, but with completely different information that doesn't match my tree. And I'm sort of like, what do I do? And so, but with Goldie May, I can go and I can select these different trees, and I can see, and with the overlay of the subway map, I can see where the big differences are between the trees. Is this the right person for my tree? Is other people's stuff matching with my tree, or is it something completely and totally, utterly different? So this is a very cool program, which can track all of this stuff for me. So when it comes back, so when I have to go back and I have to write the paper, I can go back to this project and I can say, okay, here's all the places that I went. Here's all the information that I found. And like, you can keep track of the information as you go, just click it and it's kept. And you can say, get rid of these ones. We don't need those ones. But it can show you where you've been, and you can put in, and as it's tracking you, you can turn around and say, yes, found vital information here. This site, no help whatsoever, so that you don't waste time going back to sites. And I have spent time doing that, going back to the same site and researching the same information over and over again because I wasn't tracking it properly. But with Goldie May, I can track every site I have been to, and I can take notes onto those sites. Yes, found this information here, this site, not worth it. So I'm saving time by not going back over to the same sites over and over again, expecting different results. It's basically how it turns out. So when it comes to, so people turn around and, and I've got 3 matches in this past week of DNA matches. And the only reason I've done that is because I have a well-researched tree from a certain point onwards that I've been able to plug in one piece of missing information, and boom, both of our trees have connected. We've found that connection. Others are taking a little longer because there is a big gap. Like, they've got their tree over here, I've got my tree over here, and we've got no idea what goes in the middle. But other ones, it's sort of like, oh, that was one major thing I found today. Yesterday, I was talking about a fourth cousin. Hang on. Where's my DNA pile? I actually have a pile that I'm creating called DNA matches. So they're all in this. Yes, DNA match. That's this one. So I had one which had a fourth cousin on it, but I didn't know who her dad was. Like, I had already verified, because it came up with the little, let me show you here. It came up with a little evaluate on the little boxes here. So I already knew who this person was, but it came up with these other 2 people which were not on my tree, plus this one which I had no idea what their name was, and then it had like little evaluates next to it. So I was able to go in and verify that yes, these people fit in this tree. They are the descendants of my second great grand aunt. Second great grand aunt is the sister of my second great grandfather, just to keep it there. And so I was able to prove that these people actually, this was her son, this was his son, but I couldn't find the guy between, so my second great grand aunt, I couldn't find the difference between her grandson and her great grandson, who was the father of the person who's the fourth cousin. But because of the time that he was born in New Zealand, there are certain time limits that they have on when you can search for information in their birth, deaths, and marriages website. It has to be a certain time and all of that. And because he is still living, found it, he's still living, I couldn't find any information from him anyway. But I went back into past papers, which is a copy of all the papers up until like 1989 or something in New Zealand. All the newspapers that have ever been published in New Zealand, they have got articles in there, and they've got it's searchable. So I typed in the father's name and came up with this. This was the coolest thing I found. I came up with the birth announcement in the newspaper of the fact that they had had a son, and it had the date the son was born. It did not have the son's name. So I was like, okay, I found maybe I have found the son's birth information. Yes, it was in a newspaper. I can't verify it because I can't get access online to the birth certificate. I would then have to write to the New Zealand Genealogical Society, ask them to go research it for me, and all of that sort of stuff. But what I did find also too is I thought, okay, what else can I find for this? So I went back to the dad, who is the grandfather of my fourth cousin, and ended up doing a search on him in the cemeteries in New Zealand. And I found his headstone with his wife's name on it. And underneath it had parents of, and it had all 4 children listed. They had 3 girls and 1 boy. I now had the name of the son. So that was how that was found, very, very quickly. Now, I haven't confirmed that that is the son or that is the father's name. I'm going to have to write to my fourth cousin and say, hey, I think I might have you in my tree, and this is how I've connected you. Is this correct? And put in there that, I'm a descendant of my second great grandfather of Samuel George Short. On my records, I show that you're a descendant of his sister Emily, and this is how I found you. Is this correct? And hopefully she'll come back and say yay on it. The only problem with putting messages into Ancestry, it takes them a long time to answer them, but that's okay. As long as I've made that. And so for now, looks like we have definitely found the name of the father. Now I just have to confirm it by going to his daughter and saying, this is what I have found. Is this the correct information? If so, then we're fourth cousins. And we've proved that DNA match. So that's a message I'm going to be sending either tonight or tomorrow, probably tomorrow after I get back. Yeah, probably tomorrow morning when I do my research time. So verifying, triple checking, double checking, verifying your resources, going out there, making a plan. Even if you make a plan of, I need to go to this site and I need to check this information for their birth records. Make sure you also use familysearch.org and use their research wiki as well, because their research wiki is really, really cool. You can go in there, you can put what country, what state you're going to be researching in, and it gives you all the information, like when they started keeping records, written records. If it's anything prior to that, it could be in parish records. They may have links to some of those stuff. Can you find the stuff online? Can you not find the stuff online? If you can't find it online, how do you find it? Like we found out, I've got a friend who was looking for somebody who was born in Maryland. Well, unless you are that person, because they're still living, unless you are that person, you can't pull that person's birth certificate or any information about them from the vital records unless you are the person that that information is for. Even if you can prove that you are a descendant of theirs, it has to be the person. If they are living, it has to be the person. If they are not living, it has to be the person who is the executor of their estate that can pull that information, or the heir of their estate that pulls that information. So, yeah, Maryland are very, very strict on some of their stuff. But other ones are sort of a little loosey-goosey on their requirements and things. But the research wiki on familysearch.org will definitely tell you, these are the records available online. If you need these records, this is where you've got to go to get them. You can either write to them, call them, walk in. And this is if you have a really good network of genealogists around the country, you can call up one of the genealogy societies in that area and say, hey, do you have somebody that can walk into this repository and find out this information for us, or go look up this information for us? Or you could take a road trip there. Road trip, yes, let's go do a road trip to somewhere and look up genealogy records. I already have contacts in Salt Lake City. That one contact I made in Salt Lake City, I found this guy was on LinkedIn, and so I'm connecting with genealogists on LinkedIn. So I found this particular guy on LinkedIn, great guy. His 2 years of voluntary service that they have to do, or required service that they have to do, the 2 years of missionary that the Mormons have to do, his was in the research library in Salt Lake City. And so he knows that place inside out, back to front. He has told me, when you come to Salt Lake City, let me know and I will meet you there and we'll go do some research. I'm sort of like, I'm in. So unfortunately, it wasn't at the time when I hadn't met him before my parents came over last time. But the next time that I'm in Salt Lake City, I'm definitely going to let him know that I'm coming to town beforehand, so we can arrange to meet there and spend a day in the family research library there, the family research library there in Salt Lake City, because I would love to go in there and do some research and everything else. I'm going to make sure I go very prepared with, this is the stuff I need to find or see if I can find, and go play. So they made that connection. Another connection I made is a woman who, Robin specializes in African American history. And she is really cool because not only is she just researching the African American side, she says a lot of people forget that there are whites involved with the African American family trees. And so she brings the two together. And she says if you're researching the white families, you can quite often find the information you need on the African American families. And so we were talking about, and I got on a Zoom with her and we're talking about this information and everything else. It was a very enlightening conversation, because people just think of African Americans, the slave trade, back in the 1800s and things, and they're just trying to research that, but they forget that there's also white families that were involved with that. And when you bring the white family side of it in, it can make the research a lot easier to find. Yes, there are still some tricks and tips and things that she has figured out how to do. But if you bring the white family in, like slave owners and things, you will find out a lot more information a lot quicker. So that was an interesting thing as well. So I'm slowly making connections on LinkedIn with other genealogists. And there's one that I'm trying to get hold of who does travel, who arranges in the footsteps of your ancestors type of travel, to go visit places, to visit the genealogy places, to set up the appointments and the times to meet with genealogists or research people at those particular places in those countries that will be able to interpret records for you if you don't speak the local language. They'll find somebody who can speak the local language as well as English, and interpret the records for you and help you find missing records and things. So there's a lot that you can learn out there, a lot of different resources that are out there. So never, ever give up. Just because you can't find one piece of information, there's a lot of times multiple places you can find it from. Like if you're looking for a birth record, have a look for a death certificate, because a lot of times on the death certificates, it may have the age of the person when they died. And on some of them, they will put down that they were like 67 years, 3 months, and 2 days. There is a really cool, if you Google the date calculator, you can put in there, I want to subtract this date from this date, or I want to subtract, I've got this date here, which is their death date, and I want to subtract 67 years, 67 years, 7 months, and 3 days from that. What date do I end up with? Which will then give you a close estimate of the actual date of birth, because it could be off a little bit. Now, I came across one obituary today when I was looking for one particular family, and there was this one obituary that caught my eye as I'm going through. It was the right surname, but totally the wrong person. But it caught my eye because it said that this person had passed, and when she passed, she was 100 years and 12 days was her age. 100 years and 12 days. So 12 days after she had celebrated her 100th birthday, she passed away. But I thought that was interesting that they put that she was 100 years and 12 days old. So I thought, okay, so what date did they put down for her death date? Okay, now I can work out her birthday, because I'll just subtract 12 days, then subtract 100 years, and I've got her birth date. Very, very quick and very easy. So I kind of like it when you see some obituaries like that. So double check, triple check your resources, because a lot of times there are people out there who have the same names. And this is, what are you doing? Somebody wants her evening scratches before we go for a WA. Okay. She comes, she sits here, she waits me to turn around, and then I get both hands going up and down her back, and she just sits there and just sort of like leans back into your hands and just scratching her back. She's so funny. So yep, she's sitting now. I wish I could show you guys how she sits. And then when I spin around, she'll position herself between my legs and just sit there while I just go up and down her back with my nails. But yeah, double check, triple check your resources. Is it the right name? If something looks off, research it further. When you get to researching, you start noticing certain patterns and things. You start notice, especially if it's a person, you get to know that person intimately when you are researching them. So if something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. So it might require a little more research. Grab yourself a copy of this, the Genealogy Standards second edition revised. The second edition revised also includes all the DNA stuff and how to add that into your genealogy as well, how to cite it and everything else. It's only it's not a very thick book, but it's got a lot, and they have wide margins. Look at this. There's a lot of space in here, so you can make notes in the margins and everything else. What was that one? Using DNA evidence. Look at that. They even have a set. So, but it basically tells you how to research, which is awesome, especially if you're doing research for somebody else, or you're doing research, even research for your own family tree, to know that that information is correct. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. And let's see what stories I can find out to tell.